So yes, hello, good morning. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Kate Pavuk. This year I'm doing admissions and development at our school, Santa Fe Waldorf. And in the past though, I've been a Waldorf teacher, and I'm so pleased to invite and welcome Bonnie River to this morning talk. And I'm so thankful she's here. I met her when I was doing my teacher training program through Gradalis, and she was, out of my teachers, she was the one I resonated with the most and got so much out of her wisdom. She's been teaching and doing things in Waldorf education for over 40 years. And her bio, I'm sure you've all read it, but I might throw it in the chat line too. And I think, I'm just gonna let her take over and start. So Bonnie, thank you so much. Welcome. I'm making you the host.
Okay, you need to record first. You need to push record.
I did.
It says paused on mine, so I guess you have it. Are you recording?
Yes.
Okay, good.
I'm recording. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's really nice to be able to reach out to you. I'm down in Mexico, right at the tip of the peninsula, Baja Sur. I've been here for about a month, and I'm going to be here for a few more weeks and then head back home to snowy mountains of Northern California, where I live in a little town called Truckee, close to Lake Tahoe. And I helped to get a school started there. And there's now a Waldorf school in Truckee. And I'm really excited about it because my grandchildren go there. So I am a grandma of 6 grandchildren. And I have been involved, as Kate said, for over 40 years in Waldorf education. A good 20 years ago, I began teaching teachers. So I worked at 2 different universities. I was assistant professor of education at Touro University. And I also worked at Rudolf Steiner College and founded their master's degree in Waldorf. Then after Rudolf Steiner College folded, I became a teacher trainer working through Gradalis, which was started back in the 1980s with my now late husband and I, and a whole group of us that have worked together now for about 47 years, actually. Not about, actually 47 years we've been teaching teachers. So I am very happy to get to reach out to Santa Fe. I've been there a few times. And I know your school, and I really appreciate your school and where you are and what you are doing. So I'm going to just set up a little bit of guidelines about what this is going to be this morning. For one, the chat line is open. You don't have a really, really large group. So if questions do arise during the time I'm talking, you could put it into the chat line. I'm not certain that I will actually be watching it until the end. If there's something that you need me to repeat, do a great big wave, because I've got you on my camera. So if you wave, I will know that you're asking for me to clarify something or repeat something. The nature of my talk is kind of like a TED Talk. I call it a Rudy Talk for Rudolf Steiner, but it's small. It's like a half an hour of a talk. And the reason why it works that way is because 1, we're online, and 2, this is being recorded for use in other times for people to just access. And so going more than about a half an hour in a talk like this doesn't usually work well. But after I finish talking, I want to invite you into questions and answers and any thoughts that you want to share. I did prepare a few things on the screen on a PowerPoint that I can share with you. So before I get started, does anyone have any requests for this particular time together before I actually start in on my talk? No hands waving. Okay. Those of you who do not have the camera on, if you need to ask me to repeat something or do something, you would have to put a hand up in your emojis down in the bottom, your reactions. So I'll go ahead and start. It's pretty important that this is a lecture that I give to adults only. So I do see we have a child present, and it's pretty important that, that I'm speaking only to adults. So I'm going to make a request that I not speak with the child listening in. So if you have earphones in your ear, that's fine. If you don't, then I'm going to ask you to listen later to this talk, okay?
Okay.
And
Alex,
Bonnie,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Also, I saw a hand up. David, did you have a hand up? Did you have
Yeah,
a?
I
Okay.
sure did. So one of the things as a new entrant to Waldorf, and I'm sure you probably hear this more than once, is really a better understanding of the main lesson book. You know, understand some of the history of it, but the practice may not be the same from at every school, and the importance of the main lesson book in terms of both when it's prepared, and we find that our daughter prepares it after the classes have been largely completed, seems to be a bit different than the original intention of maybe Steiner and some of the predecessors who have used things like that sort of notebook to keep track of notes and integrate both art and learning. So we would certainly be very interested in the main lesson book and how that plays into the overall education and what the parameters are for using it.
Okay.
Also, say what grade, please, your child is in for
That was
everyone.
Alex,
the first
Alex is,
question, if I need to know grades here.
Sure, Alex has entered 9th grade this year.
Okay, high school.
Yeah.
It changes in high school. This main lesson, or I also call it expedition lesson, changes in high school. So I will talk about that for
Great,
sure.
thank you.
Okay. Melissa, I'm just going to ask you, yes, go ahead. You have
I
your
just wanted to
earbuds in?
yeah, I just wanted to let you know I put my headphones on.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Of course.
I appreciate that.
Totally
Okay.
understand.
And, anyone else with a question that I can kind of front load how I talk and bring things up? Okay, all right. So I want to start out with like the mile high view. What is Waldorf education, and how did the curriculum actually get developed? So I'm going to go to my PowerPoint because it's a little blackboard, a mini blackboard that I prepared. So one of the things important to share with you about Waldorf education is that it was founded in 1919, and it is over 100 years old now. It's in nearly every free country, and the greatest growth of Waldorf education is actually right now in China. It's spreading very fast in China with 2 different universities that sponsor master's degree in Waldorf teaching. So there are a lot of Waldorf teacher trainers that are making their way over, especially to Chengdu, and spending a lot of time in those universities teaching. In this country, in the United States, the first Waldorf school was in New York City, and it is now over 75 years old. I would like to just talk a little bit about the ideas that Steiner brought when he was first working with teachers about what the Waldorf curriculum needed to do. He said, in order to affirm the child's consciousness at any one stage of the child's growth, the curriculum needs to match what they're able to incorporate, what they bodily can know. So the important part about Waldorf education is that it starts out seemingly slow in an emphasis on certain aspects of the child's growth, and it goes seemingly fast. And I'm saying seemingly because a lot of people think that the early childhood program in Waldorf is kind of dreamy or not quite academically focused. And yet, what it does focus on is very, very demanding for the young child, but it's demanding at the age that they are. So I wanted to talk a little bit about consciousness and how the Waldorf curriculum meets the consciousness of a child. I'm using some of the work of Dr. Otto Scharmer. He is a professor at MIT. He had 14 years of Waldorf education, And he works in Fortune 500 companies, helping them redesign and rework their leadership paradigm. And one of the things he talks about is how there's a process that all decision making needs to go through in a group. And it's the exact same process that Steiner brought as an overview of what Waldorf Education does. And it's interesting because he has actually founded his entire Presencing Institute out of MIT on the ideas of Steiner.
What are they yelling about?
So could we go ahead and go on mute? Kais Bello, you need to go on mute, if you could please.
Sorry.
That's okay. All right, so this picture is from 0 to 7, the child is basically spatial in their consciousness. And I want you to think about the idea of a little child who is crawling along the floor, maybe yourself, and a shaft of sunlight comes shining through, and it's almost like awakening when they see all the sparkles in the light. And the child pulls them up to sit, pulls him or herself up to sitting, and begins to wave their hands in front of them and command the world of space around them. And the important memory that you might have from that time is that it was endless. Time was not really there for you. It was an endless experience of constant movement of things happening, but you were the center of that entire experience. Everything in the world was you. So that's what is meant by I in me. That is, you are the center and everything around you is almost, so to speak, orchestrated by you. And you have this experience of it being endless and always in movement. So this experience of space goes all the way through 7 years. And in that experience of space, the child needs to accomplish very, very big deeds. One of which is to integrate their senses, to bring their senses to a single point of perception. So when a baby is born, the hearing is not connected to the sight. You can see a child react to a sound and then move all over trying to figure out where that sound came from. Well, that's the idea that the senses in the child are not fully integrated. And when those senses become integrated, the child has an ability to focus, to point, you bring their perception into the current moment. And at that time, when that has happened, the child is entering into an experience of time. Now, time is a very interesting thing because around 5 years of age or so, the child begins to say things like yesterday or today or tomorrow. They begin to have a sense that time is a demarcation of space. They begin to know that they are moving now in a sequence through a day. So the idea of the early childhood curriculum is all about rhythm and sequence, so that the child comes easily into that experience of time. So everything that happens in the early years is to augment the child's sense of time and timing. Well, why would you want to augment it? Because you want the child to feel secure. Security happens when the child can imagine what that future is going to be, even if what it is after we do creative play, then we eat. Or after we do creative play, everything has its place as we put things away in our room. So the important piece about the early childhood curriculum is that it focuses this ability to move from space into time. So very briefly, let's look at what happens in a Waldorf early childhood program. In the early childhood program, the child enters the room and the teacher has already set up a rhythm for the day. And the rhythm for the day that has been set up involves the children coming in, the children greeting, and for some teachers, starting right out with a little circle. And in that circle time, it has a theme that's based on the season and what's happening in nature around them. So that again is a reminder of time and time passing. And these verses and these songs that the teacher does and the movements that the teacher does during that time affirm for the child this sense of belonging in a body and how the body moves through space, and how these verses that they speak and these movements that they make establish themselves as a being that lives in time, in space. So the morning circle is a really important time of day for the young child. And this actually carries through all the way to 9 years of age in 3rd grade, this movement and morning circle work that happens. This also helps the child who might be struggling with making the senses work together to a single point of perception. Those movements will help the child establish that in a healthy way. So beanbag exercises, rod exercises, stomping and clapping exercises, all the things in the early years of the Waldorf curriculum that the teacher does in the morning serves to bring about that single point of perception, focus, and an ability to see sequence unfolding in time. Now, if you think about learning, whether it's math or reading or anything, it's sequentially unfolding in time. And so this movement work that is focused in on that early childhood years really supports the idea that the child will then be able to do sequential learning in the classroom experience all the way to high school. Now, if you think about what goes on in the kindergarten from the circle time on, you're going to see that the children then engage in the next big learning skill, which is social learning. How to work together, how to collaborate, how to be a group. And that's a very big learning for young children because they start out, they've established their own autonomy, that ability to leave home and go to a new situation, walk through a door and be in a different group. They've done that, but that ability to become generative in a group is very, very important. So the children then have this creative playtime in which they experiment with different roles and different positions and different ways of interchange. And in that, they learn what works and what doesn't work in the social sphere. This is something that is getting left out in modern mainstream education, this socialization skill that is so important. And I did tell Kate, and I think she'll put it on your website, about a film that was generated by CEOs of big technology companies in Silicon Valley who chose to put their children in Waldorf Education. And they published this as Preparing for Life. That's the name of the film, and it's taken many awards. But why I bring it up is because one of the things that they focus on over and over is that in the world of business, social skills are now ranking #1. Emotional, social well-being is what's the most important thing in creating this ability to become an innovative team. So what's important about the Waldorf kindergarten is this emphasis on play is the work of the child. The work is the play. After they're finished playing and they've touched all of these natural items that have told their sensory system about the natural world, from stone to wood to cloth and silk as opposed to linen, and all these different feelings that they get with their senses in the kindergarten, then they have to learn to put everything in its place. Organizational skills, large versus small, different materials go in different bins in different places. This is a natural time for cleanup. And if you know Montessori, Montessori has a child sort things into bins in a learning station. Well, in Waldorf, you sort things into bins because that's what you do to keep order in your life. And it's really important that the children learn to put everything away and feel a certain inner satisfaction with the fact that the environment around them, they can affect and they can make beautiful. And of course, from there, the day goes on into eating a meal together, learning to listen to each other's stories from home, and then having time to be outdoors together and play in the outdoors, coming back in and hearing a story that the teacher tells verbatim out of memory, which is very, very difficult to do. And the teacher then tells this story repeatedly so that it happens that the child imitates it inwardly as they listen to the words. And sometimes the words are really high level vocabulary, they should be. Had they gone but 2 steps further in the darkness, they would have surely fallen into the precipice. But And that's the kind of language that the teacher will use in telling a fairy tale, very high level language. And so the child is absorbing this language and picturing this language. And by about the third day of hearing the story, they start actually telling the story with the teacher. And if this teacher says, if they had gone but 2 steps, the child will say, no, 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 Miss River, it's had they gone but 2 steps further. The child has it memorized. And so it's important to realize that that's how also in learning to read and comprehension, these sequential skills are built in the kindergarten. Now the kindergarten year and that spatial way of dividing up and becoming time-based is also reflected in the physical body. When the child begins to change their teeth, there is an actual organic change in the brain that has to do with centers of the brain that actually absorb an experience of time and give the child a sense of right timing for things. So they're no longer flowing along now. They know the time to eat. They know the time to do certain things. Well, that is absolute readiness for first grade. So when they enter first grade, they are still very, very spatial and needing a lot of movement, but they also need a lot of imagination. And so what is taught in the first grade is taught imaginatively in order to bring them into this time. Now, I'm going to stop here because I am going to go into the detail of what happens in first grade through high school in a very compact way. But I want you to have laid that background that when they enter the space, that when they enter time, they're over here now, they've moved outside of center and they're looking at the world from the time that they are in to all of the events that happen in the world. So it's I in the world. And by I mean self and self-awareness. So I is in the world. And through the time experiences, they go on a very large journey, which I'll be speaking about. But this journey is a journey of how human consciousness developed through leadership in different cultural times and in the unfolding of individuality through these cultures. So a leader is always an individual who is showing the group the development of individuality, what it looks like when you become self-directed. And so the idea is through this journey from 7 to 14, how the children become self-directed and thinking only for themselves, not what someone tells them to think, but how to think, is what that 7 to 14 journey is. And there's a major research that has been done on Waldorf high schoolers compared to mainstream high schoolers. And they discovered that they have this sense of decision making. They used a test out of Harvard University, and they tested the high schoolers, and they saw that these Waldorf high schoolers had this ability to discern and ask deep questions about moral and ethical issues, far more than their cohorts that were in the mainstream schools in the same socioeconomic category. Well, the important thing there is that they then further researched it and found out that it was actually laid down in the 7 to 14 years of age. The journey through the middle years of childhood, where the child begins to form their own ideas and is left free to do that so that they're not told what to think, but how to think in the process. And that unfolds through the language arts curriculum especially, which is a story of human leadership. By the time they get to high school, they're in this journey of consciousness. I look at the world, I look at myself. I look at the world, I look at myself. They now live in several places with their consciousness, out in the world, moving inward to the self, as you see in this little drawing that I made. So I lives in you and in me. In other words, that person now has come to the place where they can listen to another on a deep level and comprehend what that other one is thinking, and at the same time stay solid in their own way of thinking. Now, this is an important aspect of the curriculum, that it basically says the way that we teach, not just the content, but the way that we teach honors the child who's living in space, brings the child through time, and bursts the child in consciousness. I'm going to give you one example. When I was sitting at the dining room table long ago, when my children were younger, I had my son who was in 5th grade, and I had a friend who was in high school. And the friend who was in high school turned to my 5th grade son and said, "What are you studying right now?" And my son said, "We're hearing the Iliad and the Odyssey. We're on the Odyssey. He's on the raft, and he's being bound to the shaft, and he's listening to the sirens, but he's not going, and the raft is tipping back and forth." And this is how my son's talking with all this great enthusiasm for what's happening in the story. And the high schooler looks at him with this interesting look upon his face, kind of puzzlement, and he goes, "That's what I'm studying too." And my son said, "What?" And the high schooler said, "Yeah, you're on the raft, and I'm learning about what you're learning." You're on the raft, and I'm finding out what you're learning. That's the image of consciousness taking birth. That's the image of the child who then can be reflective about the lessons of life, and who is solid enough in themselves that they can question these things. Well, that time of consciousness is high school years, but it also goes all the way through to about 42. And I won't give you a lesson in human development that takes us through to 42. But what's important is to recognize that those high school years are, what is this really about? What are the lessons in life that I need to contemplate and think about? How am I self-directed? What am I doing? How does the curriculum reflect that? That's an important aspect. So in this second slide, I'm going to go rather quickly with it, but you have to, kind of see it from another point of view also, I hope. That 0 to 7 is a world of sense, and it's very important that the child experiences that the world is good, that what happens is good, and that's bodily centered. That's being fed, having good naps, being able to play, being able to feel free in their body. All of it, self-centeredness, is really important at this age. And then the 7 to 14, a world of wonder and beauty, and the development of the social self in their group, which is why we have one-class teachers stay with a group and help form a group for as many years as possible, given the times that we're in, as many years as possible. And then when you come to the development of the spirit, it's the thinking human being, 14 to 21, the world of affirmation of truth. It's the ethical self or the civic self that gets developed in those years. So when you look at language arts, down here, this spiral on the left-hand side, in language arts, the most important thing is that the child is actually moving into an experience of starting in the wide world. In the wide world, my arrow's going the wrong direction, guys. Start out in the world in the fairy tales, which is archetypal for every culture, and move through all of the stories to come to the self. And in language arts, the self is the debater, the one who can ask good questions and assert themselves in debate. So in language arts, it starts with fairy tales in 1st grade, moves through myth and folk tales, moves into stories of the very ancient cultures, then moves into stories of the ancient cultures going all the way from India and Persia and Egypt and Greece, and what is governance. And then it goes from there into governance goes decadent in Rome, and what happens in the Roman era, and also this whole ability for the child to know that governance can actually reach out way beyond the region that anyone is in. It moves from Rome all the way through to this rebirth of beauty in the Renaissance. And from the rebirth of beauty in the Renaissance, it moves into the Middle Ages and rebellion against outer authority, which is the church in this case. And this happens in all of the cultures. So a teacher brings it from the Asiatic cultures and the Middle European cultures, and also from the South American cultures, because all of these cultures embrace through their story and through their civilizations this journey that goes from stories that are about all of us, like fairy tales, all the way to the fight against the outer authority, the establishment of the inner authority, and the ability to debate. That's that's really the general big picture of what language arts is. And when you look then at what science is start from the place that you're in. Know and feel and experience nature and the trees and the wideness and the bigness. Start from there and move all the way to the tiniest little cork that moves through your body into physics. So when you start in your science curriculum, you're really nature-based all the way till about 3rd grade. And in 3rd grade, you start paying attention to temperature and wind and moon movements and all kinds of things. The teacher will put moon phases on the blackboard along with the day and the month, and they'll be looking outward at those planetary configurations. By the time you get to 6th grade, you're really in physics and thermodynamics and all kinds of experimentations and things that you're doing to see what is this world made up of. You start taking it from the macrocosmic world down into the microcosmic world. And when you make it through all the way to high school in chemistry and in physics classes in high school, you're using a high-level instruments for exploring the microscopic world and for seeing the dynamics of how things are interdependent, which is networking theory. And that is all the way into knowing the world as networked. Well, there is a movement in the university level called the Transdisciplinary Movement. And the Transdisciplinary Movement has identified the way Waldorf teaches as the most transdisciplinary education that exists in the world today. So it's not surprising that a lot of university professors have their children in Waldorf schools, and it's not surprising that a lot of the Waldorf schools have grown up around universities. This study of transdisciplinarianism is very important now to the world, because some of the biggest concepts, like how do we solve our climate change problems? People are saying if you can't think in a transdisciplinary way, from the poetic to the physics, if you can't put those things together, you probably are not in the mindset that is going to change this forward movement towards planetary destruction. You actually have to have a different mindset. So transdisciplinary thought exists in physics, it exists in language, it exists in everything, because it's saying you can't be in your silo of thinking. You cannot be any longer in a single discipline. Well, the Waldorf teacher in their training becomes a generalist and is not someone who is in their silo. I just flashed this in front of you because this is the work of Otto Scharmer in the Presencing Institute at MIT. And he teaches very similar ideas to what the Waldorf teacher is basing their lessons on. So if you're interested, look up Presencing Institute. Also, I think it's important to let you know there's a link up there above in this screen to Preparing for Life, the documentary film about Waldorf School of the Peninsula, which is where the technological center has been for a long time, Silicon Valley, and it's these CEOs and venture capitalists who went ahead and made this beautiful award-winning film. So your link is up there. And this will be available to you from Kate too, I'm sure. So I'm also just gonna let you look at something really quickly. This is the 9 intelligences of Howard Gardner from Harvard University, and he's basically saying how the Waldorf grade school subject classes develop all the 9 intelligences. And Kate, I think you can take this if you wish to, and make sure that people can get this also. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on these things because I want to come back and be able to talk with you. This is a breakdown of the curriculum done by the Green Meadow Waldorf School. And this is what is taught in each grade in each of the subject or 4 subject areas, from language arts and mathematics, science and technology, social studies and world languages, music, applied and fine arts, and movement. The reason I show this to you is because sometimes it's hard to realize when you're in a single school in a small area or region that you're part of a very large movement. And that very large movement that you are part of is bound together through this idea of how a curriculum unfolds this consciousness over time. So when we think about how this consciousness is unfolding over time through the curriculum, then we also have to say, how is that affirming that the child knows themselves as a learner? Well, if you look into the classroom, you will see in the first grade all the way through 8th grade that during the time the child is learning, whether it's physics, whether it is ancient Greek history, whether it is fairy tale or mythologies, whatever it is, they are creating these books themselves. They are becoming authors. They are creating the books of the curriculum that they are learning. And they take great pride in the beauty that they create with those books. And as they learn that as a discipline, they begin to see that they themselves are generators. And the most important thing is generative ability. And any of you who know Erik Erikson know autonomy you have to have. This ability of the self and generation is where self-esteem comes from. Self-esteem comes from this ability to know that you can do. Now, every child is different. There may be a mathematically inclined, a language arts inclined, an artistic inclined. They're all inclined differently. And the idea is that the teacher creates that group to respect each other for those different inclinations, for their certain kinds of passions that start to develop over the elementary years. At the end of 8th grade, the child has learned through classroom experience to do these illustrations, to do these beautiful writings that have to do with the curriculum that they're learning. And by the time they get to high school, what they have next to do is prepare for further education, which means that during class, they take notes, they do sketches, they do a lot of things. Then they go off alone, not as a group, and they create their own unique expedition book. That's what I call a main lesson, an expedition. So they end up being on their own doing it. Now, in answer to David Karshner's question, I would only say that that preparation through those first 8 years of creating that main lesson book is one of those assumptions that can be made that the child is prepared. And if a child transfers into a Waldorf high school, they may need some extra coaching to be able to create these lesson books. And I know that in the big high schools in Sacramento, where I have served to help develop them, if it's someone transferring in who has never had any background in Waldorf before, they have a student mentor. And that student mentor helps them learn to do this work. So I don't know what you have in the Santa Fe High School, but that is an important aspect for those children who do transfer in. It starts, those student mentorship pieces start back in 5th and 6th grade. If they're transferring in 5th and 6th grade, they get what's called the buddy or the mentor to help them actually learn to adjust to a brand new way of being taught and of producing what they have learned. So I feel like the important piece that I'd like to wrap around this is the idea that human consciousness recapitulates all the history of humanity is an idea that is foundational to Waldorf education. So the idea that a child starts with the generalist world knowledge that lives in fairy tales, folk tales, and myths in every culture all over the world, that they start from that generalist idea of what is life about, how does trickery happen, all of these little stories that have to do with the development of becoming human, move themselves through mythologies, especially in the Greek myths. And then in the time of Greece, they enter history. That's the Iliad and the Odyssey. That is the fall of Troy. That's the beginning of history lessons. And so they begin to actually question, how does governance work? What is a leader? So they look at how the Greek forum was established. And then they also look across to the time of leadership in Asia, and they look at who was Confucius and why did he feel that it was so important to give some guidance to the people through the lawfulness that he established as how we conduct ourselves in life? And then they'll look at the Aztecs and they'll look at what is territory and what is ownership. That is right in alignment with studying also ancient Rome. So they're going all over the world looking at the ideas of what does it mean to found a civilization, to become a leader. And of course, when they're doing it, they're reading the poetry, they're reading the plays, they're reading the literature from those areas. So it's quite broad, and it's quite a demanding thing for a Waldorf teacher to be able to move around through those cultures, especially starting in 5th grade. That's when it really begins to blossom in that way. So they look at this ideas of leadership, ideas of what makes a culture from this feeling life. So they're hearing the stories, they're experiencing these great myths. We're not analyzing them. That's high school. We don't analyze them, we let the child feel them. But what happens, and every teacher has seen it, is the child goes, ooh, no, I wouldn't do that. It's like when you talk about Hannibal going up and over the mountains and allowing the elephants to fall off the cliffs, these precious, beautiful elephants that you have built up as they're wearing silver bells and the most beautiful saddles, and each of the owners takes such pride in the beauty of their animal. And then Hannibal sends them up over the mountains on a very narrow path, and the path is crumbling away. And the children inside themselves they feel the feeling when an animal falls into the chasm. But the teacher doesn't step back and go, do you think that's right or do you think that's wrong? Should Hannibal have sent them or shouldn't he have? That comes in high school. So this whole idea that the child is living these experiences, because those experiences live in the soul of a child. And they go, oh no, oh yeah, oh no, they do that. But the teacher doesn't go, yeah, you're right, you should say oh no. The teacher doesn't do that, because the teacher knows that the freedom of the child is to feel the feelings they feel and not to try to educate those feelings into a decision that is causing the child to then have to become aligned with the group think. They have to stay individual as long as possible. So in that curriculum, that's how that works. It's more conventional knowledge being brought through the cultures. But you juxtapose that with math. Math is not conventional. Math is lawful. So what happens with math is that the child learns laws from the very beginning. 2 and 2 is always 4. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. That's the law of how numbers work. And this whole process of math being something that lives in your body, how you live proportionately in the sizes of your bones, and all of these things is the development of the lawfulness of how math builds up the world. And so beside convention, which is how do we rule ourselves, comes math. What is the world we live in that is lawful? So going through the sequential processes of math and teaching math thinking, not just math processes, but thinking, is an important aspect of the curriculum also. And children really feel very inclined towards mathematical thinking when they see it as a history. What did Pythagoras teach and do? Why was that precious when they discovered this kind of geometry in the world? So it's a very important transition in their thinking too. Math is actually to teach sequence and to teach thoughtfulness in a very lawful way. Then if we look at the sciences, it's the same thing. Math has to go alongside the sciences, because math is one of the most important ways of coming to the truth of what you're observing in the world. And so it starts with the world that you're in, place-based education, all the way to physics and use of microscopes and use of all the tools of astronomy, being able to really look further out into the world, even to the point where in the high school, some of the best lessons are the lessons that are taught by visiting professors or visiting teachers from the physics departments in local universities, because the high schoolers get very excited about actually learning the lawfulness that is being discovered in the world of physics. So from language arts being more conventional to math being more lawful, the child takes this journey through the education. And in the end, they are someone who's had a very deep liberal arts education. And that's something that, you know, is being looked at now everywhere in the world. What happened to liberal arts? Why are we so uninformed and silo-based in our disciplines and not wider in our way of thinking? So in the research on Waldorf graduates from all over the world, and there's been research studies, some of the most important things is that they are inquirers that think out of the box. They think on many multiple dimensional levels about any one aspect of a question or a concern or an exploration, because they have learned a liberal arts education all the way through those 12 years. So that is the piece that I wanted to bring to you, the little piece that I wanted to bring to you to consider when you're thinking about your child in a Waldorf school. So I'm looking now to see if there are some questions here. Let's see. Kate, you wanted me to be able to enlarge myself. Everyone has to do that themselves. They have to choose.
No, you're good. That was a while ago. Never mind.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Is there anyone that has a question? Gerson Perez. Yes.
Hi, Bonnie. Thank you so much for this interesting lecture that you're giving us. Because this lecture is thought to be for parents, what advice would you give a parent in general terms? I know there are many things that a parent can do at home, but in general terms, what would be like the advice that you could give a parent in the 3 different septennials?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I say the key words for 0 to 7 is I wonder, because the child's going to ask you, why is the sky blue? Why is the earth brown? Why are clouds moving? What is, you know, it's like they're waking up to see the whole world. And then the clouds, they move that way because they paint the picture of everything in the whole world. Look, let's see if we can look at the clouds. You see what I'm saying? It's like, look out into the world. Do you see that horse riding through the sky in that cloud? Clouds are the painters of things that happen in the world. A way of speaking that has wonder and imagination in it is very, very important in the early years. Not scientific explanations, but not fantasizing either. You don't actually say that that the flower fairy is dancing up and down. Do you see her dancing up and down? When it's not really what you see. That's a fantasy. What you see is a beautiful flower dancing in the wind. Look at how it dances the wind, like it has these beautiful skirts around it. That's a different thing than fantasizing something. If you understand it, it is based in truth and science. So it's important that you speak in that way in the early years. In the middle years, it's really important to use story and use poetry and use metaphor and analogy as much as possible. So when you say, oh, it seems like he treated you like what happened to Julius Caesar, like many knives in your back. Did it feel like that to you when they're having a social problem? You know what I'm saying? So using this analogy and metaphor to help them know that what they're experiencing is absolutely affirmed through history and through story. These things do happen. Now, I'm not saying that you avoid direct speech either. It's like, wait a minute, what you just said to me was hurtful. That's direct speech. They need that also. They need to know that they have that kind of power to inflict pain and hurt on you or another person. You can also say, hey, wait a minute, what you just said was so beautiful. I want to think about it for a moment. So this enlargement of the soul experience in 7 to 14 is really, really important. So having this ability to say, I want to feel this a little longer, I want to think about this a little more, is stretching out that experience of time and not compressing it into so many factoids. It's like, let it be bigger, let it be bigger. And when you get to high school, it's it's really important to introduce to the high schooler that the most important thing they'll ever learn in their life is rules of debate. So if you don't agree with me on something, we're actually going to step back for a moment and not just be fighting people, we are going to be fighting ideas. So what's important in high school is that we fight our ideas. What is the idea, the ideal? What is the motive behind what you're saying? What would that bring about in the world? So I'm going to fight one side, you fight the other side. Let's see what we do when we do that. That's the fighting of ideas, not the fighting of people. So the high school is all about that. So I hope that helps you kind of see in a very big general way how those different ages get approached.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Is there anyone else with a question or a thought you would want to share? Sarah Jane Moody.
Hi there. I'm just looking back. It was something about math that you mentioned. Math lives in your body. Math builds the world.
Yeah.
Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. There's a wonderful book. If you have a real interest in, if you look at sacred geometry or you look at books on math and you take it into the world of form, there is a book written by a doctor called Harmony in the Human Body. And it's all about long bones, short bones, round bones, and intervals, and how each one of your joints have certain sounds that sound in your brain when you move. So there's flat and sharp is a real tone. It's something that really tones through your body. And there's a reason why we call well-toned body a well-toned body. So this idea that math is also the numbers that sing through the world, that form the world. I have a movie that I love very much, Sam Waterston, Liv Ullmann, and I'm trying to say the name of the other actor, but it's called Mind Walk. And the physicist is Liv Ullmann, who explains that it is through our thinking about how structure works that structure maintains itself. That again is a transdisciplinary thought. But what's important is that we're beginning to understand that math is actually a place of form in the world. So mathematical thinking becomes really important. If you want form to shift, you've got to look at your way of thinking and your formulaic thinking to shift something. And that's what the physicists are coming up against, is how are they shifting their thinking, which will then open up new realms of how math works. Does that answer you a bit there? Okay. Anyone else? Kirsten, yes.
Yeah, me again. In this generation, we have seen that parents, not because they want to, but just because that's the way our culture is, cannot avoid their children to be overexposed to media.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you could give some advice to parents about how to control that a little bit, and even more just to say some of the effects of overexposure to media.
Okay. When I was a principal at Waldorf School in Southern California, Aliso Viejo it's a journey school. I worked with a woman named Diana Graber to develop the CyberWise curriculum for schools. And it's cyber ethics, basically. And it starts in 6th grade, right in the very beginning, and it goes 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and it's the best program there is that I know of in cyber civics. She is the developer of it. I was like an advisor to her. Twice a week we met for a couple of hours and developed this curriculum and then test drove it at that Waldorf school. One of the things that I think a parent needs is you need support in being able to figure out how to talk to your child about where to access and where not to access information, whether things are truthful or not, whether things are hurtful or not. All of those things have to be navigated in a very straightforward, conscious way. So the website is called CyberWise. The logo is just this little owl. And there's several articles in there about when your child first starts using social media, the conversations you need to have. And I think it's really, really well done. So it's like having a resource like that that can guide you. It also goes right down to here's the net nannies that you want to put on a child's phone. This is how to do it. It's that kind of thing. I think that in today's visually saturated world, it is a battle, Kirsten. It's very, very hard because you want your child to have an inner life and imagination. And actually, what fights it is the screen. What keeps the child from having that imagination. So I usually say to parents, please, please try to protect your children from seeing the fairy tales online, seeing the ones that their teacher is telling, seeing the folk tales, seeing the movies about the Iliad and the Odyssey. Let them see it inwardly first, because developing that kind of imagination is what develops into innovative thinking. And all of the research that's been done on brain-based neurological studies about what builds innovative thinking, it starts with imagination. So the child has to have that. And if you take that away from them by giving it to them on the screen, then they don't, it's something that they become passive to instead of active in. And that's how I would share it, in its kernel, the kernel of importance to your question. So thank you for that question. Kate?
Thank you, Bonnie. That's a great segue, because my question is about just maybe a little touch on, I know that you study the brain and research about how the brain forms and things that now we know that Rudolf Steiner didn't technically know, but somehow had a feeling for. So looking at the connection between the development of a human or a child brain, adolescent brain, et cetera, and how it connects to the way our curriculum is offered in Waldorf education and how it meets the child at the developmentally appropriate level. I mean, just a little bit about that, if you could.
Okay, I think one of the most important things, Kate, is that you need to put up, you just sent me a beautiful talk that I think you need to put up on your school's website from someone who's done a lot of brain-based research and has his children in Waldorf education. The person I studied the most was Joseph Chilton Pierce, and all of the work that he did on brain-based education and why he chose Waldorf for his family. One of the most important things is that there's certain areas of the brain that are developing but not matured. And if you push them into use of those areas of the brain before they're matured, the chances are that that maturity will not get fully established and stabilized. And so in that, I would just kind of point to the discovery of the prefrontal lobe, which is the executive process of the brain. That process of the brain is dim. It isn't really fully formed in the 1 to 7-year-old. The 1 to 7-year-old can have an inkling of a feeling towards something being not just or not right. But it's only an inkling of a feeling towards that. But by the time you get to 14 years of age, that is the area of the brain that is the most maturing and the most in development, which is the executive processes, which says, this is some choices I have to make in my life, which is the most ethically right for me. What is the decision that I need to make in this moment? In this moment, everything is momentarily. And so the prefrontal lobes have now developed to the point where debate is absolutely what they must do, because it develops that even more deeply. So in the mid-cortical regions, it's all the sensory regions of the brain, and that's all through 7 to 14. Developing balance, developing sight, developing all of these things to work together is what the Waldorf curriculum does through art, through movement, and through music, and all of the temporal arts that the child does. So you really have to develop that center. I don't want to go into brain anatomy in this talk here, Kate, but it's the central part of the brain where you integrate your senses. That's what's really emphasized in the middle years. It's the lower brain, the cerebellum, then the sense of balance and the sense of movement and the sense of spatial orientation and body geography that happens up to 7 years of age. And then when you get to high school, it's your prefrontal lobes, and it's not as much movement outward as it is movement inward. So, and I think that looking at this lecture that you have, Kate, would be really, really important for the parents of the school that have those questions. Any
Thank you
other
so much.
questions? Any other questions? Any other thoughts that anyone would like to share? Okay, we just got to an hour, which is a good amount of time when a recording is happening. I see you paused. Okay, so is there anyone who wants to engage with me on anything before I actually close this session? Okay, I'm going to share the last slide then. This to me is probably the most important statement that Steiner ever made talking to the teachers. To receive the child with reverence, educate the child with love, and let the child go into the world in freedom. And by freedom, Steiner meant a very clear thinking, self-aware human being. Thank you for your attention. I really appreciate it. And I hope that this is something that you can share. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was wonderful.
Entonces.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.